Hello, and welcome to another edition of Move It or Lose It. And today I'm so excited to have a guest on that if you were able to see the webinar, you heard us mention several times Can Do MS. So today I have not just the VP, she was the VP in 2020, but now is more recently became the Chief Operating Officer and leading the work in programs, marketing, and development. So no further ado, welcome, Kathy Costello. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
It has been so awesome to get to know you. My first introduction was from Jen Powell, and who I've grown to love. And just really has been so exciting for me, Kathy, to learn more about Can Do MS. Of course, for the last few years, I've been learning some things, really watching what Can Do MS does, but to really learn more about how you guys meet the patient's needs has been so exciting to me and just been something that I watch in just awe, because having multiple sclerosis like I've had for over 20 years, back in the days when, and you know this, and we'll get into this, where there was just no answers and no one listening, and back to the snail mail, days, it has just been so incredible to watch where we were and where we are now, and to see people like you and to see places and groups like Can Do MS really kind of put their arms around us and help us to feel not so isolated, but there are programs, there are things for us. So I've been so excited to be able to interview you. And I want you to talk about some of the things that brought you, because I love the story that you shared, that before this ever happened. Talk to us, to our listeners that may not know who you are. How did you even become interested in multiple sclerosis? Because I love this story.
Well, thanks. And thank you for all your very kind words. We're very, very happy to hear that. And it's our hope that within our organization, that's what we hope for, is that we are really listening and we really are meeting the needs of the people who live with MS, and not just the person who has the diagnosis, but really all those people around them that are also struggling in their own way. But a long time ago, back in the 80s, I was a staff nurse, and I happened to be on a neurology unit. And one thing that I didn't mention to you in the past, Kathy, was that at that time, my life had taken quite a turn that I didn't see coming at all. And so I made a change in what I was doing for work that I also didn't expect to ever do. And I actually took a job as a night nurse. And the opening was on a neurology unit. And it was in an academic center, the University of Maryland. And the department chair at the time was an MS specialist.
Okay.
And back then, there was no home care, right? So if you needed to have Solumedrol for an MS relapse, you had to come into the hospital. Okay. If you were getting diagnosed with MS, you came into the hospital. So it was a totally different healthcare system. So on our unit, at any given time, about half of the people who were there either were under diagnosis for MS, or they were experiencing a relapse. And if they were experiencing a relapse, they were on steroids.
Right, up all night.
Right, up all night, exactly. So any of your listeners who have ever had that enormous gargantuan dose of steroids, you are up.
Oh yeah.
And of course, I was up because I was And so we had this enormous opportunity to just talk. And for me, it was really about listening. Here we all were. I was 30 years old, and this was a group of mostly women in their 20s.
I was going to say probably close to the same age.
Exactly. And they were nurses and teachers and doctors and attorneys and any possible walk of life. Yet here their life had taken this turn that they never saw coming.
Sure.
And I could relate to that. I could not relate to what was happening because of MS, but that sense of, oh my God, what am I going to do now?
Right.
And so they talked to me about their fear of the future and the uncertainty that MS would bring, and how it had influenced their relationships, and not necessarily in the best of ways.
Right.
how they feared for their job. Should I take a promotion? What
Right.
if something happens to me, or should I have kids? So all
Right.
of these things that all of us in that age group were thinking of, but now they had to think of it with this monkey on their back, so to
Yes.
speak, all the time of, I always have to think about that and what that might bring to my life. And
Yeah.
it made me at that moment, and I had already been a nurse for a
Mhm.
while at that point. And I didn't really have a purpose in career. I mean, I was a
Mhm.
nurse and I enjoyed being a nurse, but I knew that this was my purpose. I knew that this was an area that was going to be my career, that I wanted to participate in some way in MS care. And
Mhm.
I also hoped that I would be able to influence how that care happened. Um, and so it was not long after that the MS Center at the University of Maryland reached out to me and
Okay.
said, "Hey, we have this new drug called beta seron, and we need an injection program. Could
And
you?"
what year was that?
That was 1993.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and so they wanted me to come on board and teach people how to self-inject beta seron. And I said, "Yeah, sure, I can do that." And I said, "What's beta seron?" And so, there was a big learning curve about this new drug. And
Right.
then I had even more opportunity to learn from people,
Mhm.
right? I mean, they learned from me and how to give the shot
Right.
and what the side effects were, but I learned from them
Mhm.
about what was happening in their life and how
Yeah.
frustrating it was. And ultimately, my director, whose name was Kenneth Johnson, he and I said, maybe you want to go back to school and maybe become a nurse practitioner, because
Mhm.
he thought and I thought that I could maybe have a different kind of an impact, by being able to really provide more diagnosis, more management. I can prescribe, refer people to different things.
Sure.
And at the same time, he said, "And I'd like you to develop us as a comprehensive MS center. Do you think you could do that?" I said, "Yeah,
Sure.
sure." He said, "Well," and I said, "Do I have a budget?" He said, "Yeah, no, there's no money. You got to figure that out too." So anyway, we did. We actually put together a group of people, and they were already called the MS Center. So
Uh-huh.
we were able to have research clinicians. We had a psychologist. We brought in a
Mhm.
physical therapist, other nurses,
Mhm.
myself. And we actually were able to put together the beginnings of a multidisciplinary team
Wow.
that could help people who were living with this disease. And,
Right.
this was all in the 90s.
Yeah.
There weren't
I
a lot of,
remember.
we didn't have a lot of drugs, right? We had beta seron, then we had Avonex,
Right.
then we had
So,
Copaxone.
but yeah, my first one was Avonex. So when beta seron came out, I'm curious, Kathy, what were the patients, were they excited? Because that was before me. So when beta
Okay.
seron came out, that was when my aunt had it. So she was on
Yeah.
that. Were they excited about it? Were they nervous?
All of the above. I
Yeah.
think that there was a lot of media hype around
Mhm.
it, to tell you the truth. And it unfortunately made it sound like this was going to be the cure for MS.
Right.
And instead, it caused people to have flu-like symptoms and
Yeah.
pain at the injection site, and they had to give themselves a shot every other day. And
Sure.
not everybody could get it. There was
Right.
actually a lottery system, because there wasn't enough drug available. And so the
Mhm.
company developed this lottery where you kind of put your name in, and then you were given a number anywhere from 1 to 1,000, and
Interesting.
you had to wait essentially until your number came up in order to get the drug. It was terrible. It was a
Wow.
terrible time.
As a
Um,
nurse, that had to be so difficult for you
oh
to
my
have
God,
these
yeah,
patients, and you fall in love with them. You can't help it.
that's right.
And then you're waiting, and they come in, and their number's not there, and they're waiting, their families at this point, and you're just praying and praying, hoping that
Exactly.
please let their number be called. Please let something happen.
Yeah. And then, as it turned out, within 6 months, they had plenty of drug. And
Yeah.
so all that anxiety, all that worry and uncertainty almost wasn't necessary, because then everybody had access to the drug. But
Right.
it was that period of time when no one knew what was going to be happening next. So when people would come in for injection training,
Mhm.
they were surprised at how difficult it was to actually give themselves a shot. And
Yeah.
the feeling that they had of, wait a minute, I'm not so sure I can do this. And they all did. They were unbelievably wonderful.
Yeah.
But it was that initial, I'm sorry, you want me to do what?
Sure. Sure.
But
Absolutely.
people did it and they got through
Yeah.
these flu-like symptoms. But that's where you really develop, in my mind, relationships with people, because now they're calling me every day, like, is this how I'm supposed to feel? Is this okay? Listen,
Sure.
my injection site looks like this. Is that okay? So, we had this ongoing dialogue. And so there
Yeah.
were these hundreds of people that I felt were part of my family, like they could
Sure.
come me at any time, right?
Yeah.
And we would have a conversation. But I think ultimately what we found was that the relapses that people were having really did settle down. They
Mhm.
did have fewer relapses.
Right.
And they got through those flu-like symptoms, and they had a period of time where they felt stable.
What was that? Do you remember, Kathy, back then when it was like Avonex, was it like a 30% less relapses back then?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Trying to
Avonex
get my
a little
numbers.
bit less, and
Uh-huh.
Costello right around 30%.
Okay.
And so it didn't stop relapses.
Right.
But it was the first
But it
time,
took it down.
right? I mean, MS was initially described back in the late 1800s, right? So
Mhm.
here we are, fast forward, we're now in 1993, 94. That's a long time.
Right.
And we finally had something that changed the natural history of the disease.
Right.
Changed it enough, but it actually was a movement in the direction of, wait a minute, maybe we are going to be able to get a handle on this,
Right.
from a research perspective. And so the research began to really accelerate, because there were now tangible possibilities, right? You could
Right.
feel that, wait, if we could just understand the immune system a little bit better, and
Right.
what's happening differently in MS, couldn't we target these areas that it's not working
Sure.
properly? And so we could really settle it down. And as we know, over the years, many of these treatments have brought much bigger response, right? So much better control of relapses, even an impact on the progression of the disease.
For sure.
And we know that we can see it on the MRI, that
Yeah.
there's less new activity. So from back then to now has been an evolution.
Oh, for sure.
Revolution.
Yeah.
But you could kind of feel it. I remember sitting in a room with the research team, and I had just started.
Uh-huh.
And they were talking about the drug, and they released the blind. The blind meant who got the drug and who didn't get the drug, because the trial was over, the drug was
Sure.
approved at this point. And they sat around and they talked about it. And it's when Ken Johnson, the center director and the department head, he's the one that said, you know what? We finally have something that has changed this disease. It can
Yeah.
actually change the future that someone has.
Right.
Right. And I'm telling you, the entire room, we burst into tears.
Oh, I
over the fact
bet.
that actually could be a possibility for people.
Yeah.
It was a remarkably exciting time.
Right.
To be kind of on the cusp of this.
Yeah. I mean, looking back even in my own life, my grandfather had it. There was nothing. I mean, that's back when, they put you in hot water to see it, there was nothing. So, and then my aunt had it, but that was at the very end of her life, beta seron, she was on that. So, then fast forward, when I had it, there was Avonex, there was beta seron. So it was hope. It wasn't, Ty-Saber wasn't out yet, but there was hope. There was all of a sudden a much different perspective than when my aunt had it. And so I could feel that. I could see, even though I was terrified, and I was like, I have what? And, but there was much more hope than I remember when my aunt was diagnosed. So I absolutely understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think what came along with it was the knowledge that people with MS would still have symptoms, and we couldn't ignore that at all. I mean, we were very excited, and it's wonderful to see this change that takes place, but we couldn't lose sight of the fact that there were people who were still suffering with the symptoms that they were having.
Sure.
And despite the medications, things were still happening in people's lives because of having this diagnosis. Maybe some of the symptoms that that we really hadn't talked about a lot. For
Mhm.
instance, things like pain,
Right.
things like cognitive changes, things like mood,
Mhm.
that were kind of these invisible kinds of symptoms, right?
Sure.
That no one brought up and no one talked about, but people were trying to live with these things.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's where we were thinking that really nursing or nurse practitioner could really be of benefit, because our perspective was a little
Mhm.
bit different than the researcher perspective,
Yes.
right? And we were able to try and understand and listen to what was actually happening in that
Mhm.
person's life, and then
Yes.
what could we all do together to make that better, right? To help
I
someone.
remember back in the day, Kathy, and that is so clear is what you're saying is that, before I had a neurologist, my second neurologist he was with me for years and I just loved him. He was probably one of the best neurologists I could have ever imagined. And he passed away about 6 years ago and was just phenomenal. But one of the things that I really loved were my nurses. They were such a huge part of my life because when doing the infusions, they were with me the whole time. They were the people that knew my life. They knew my kids. They knew my story. They knew so much about me. They were the ones that they give me their cell phone and say, call me. If you need anything, call me. And so you're absolutely right. The relationships that we had with our nurses were like none other. They became close to family. So
And that's how we felt too.
yeah.
As the nurses, it was
Mhm.
everyone. This was all our
Yes.
family. And it was remarkably meaningful, sad at times,
Mhm.
frustrating, but so meaningful. And it made all of us, and there's an organization actually called the International Organization of MS Nurses. And a long time ago, I was part of a group that got that off the ground, thanks to a woman,
Wow.
another nurse by the name of June Halper.
Okay.
There was a group of us that got that started, and that's how we all felt, right? We were
Mhm.
all part of, helping people manage through, listening to what was going on and trying to figure out how best we could all work together to help that. And the organization was built in order to help other nurses learn and to be able to do the things that we were doing.
Sure. Absolutely. So now fast forward from there. So now you've developed this, they've now made you, they want you to lead this. There's no funding, but they want you to lead this, develop this new program because you're amazing. So figure it out, Kathy. We don't have funding for this, but you got this.
Yeah,
So
so
you
we
get
figured it
this
out.
going. Yes.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
now
we did figure it out. We got some funding. We figured out funding. We were very, very creative. But I
Mhm.
think what we knew was that in a disease like MS, there's so many different things happening and it's affecting different functions that someone has. There's no one person, no one healthcare provider that has the expertise to manage all that, right?
Right.
It's just not possible. It's also not the greatest idea to say, well, here's your physical therapist and here's your urologist and here's, your speech language pathologist, and not have them all talk to one another.
Right.
So in building it kind of in one place, we were able to build it so that we all talked to one another, and so that people had a little better opportunity to have more coordinated care.
And where were you then, Kathy?
This was the University of Maryland.
Okay.
And so I thought that it actually, in my mind, worked quite well. There were pieces
Yes.
we wanted more of,
Mhm.
and funding made some things more challenging than others.
Yes.
But
But back then, Kathy, that was phenomenal.
yeah,
Because even when I had it in Michigan, we didn't have that. I mean, you had to go to a urologist. There wasn't a neurourologist here. You went to a regular urologist and hoped that they understood what it was that you had, but typically they really didn't. They didn't understand what you were going through with MS and urology. They didn't understand many things. You were kind of on your own to piece together different doctors and not really understanding what you were going through. How would you explain this to a different doctor? So I applaud that they had that in Maryland, because in different states, we really didn't have that. So it was kind of piecing together what we didn't really understand what we needed, and trying to find different doctors to try to help us. But it was a very confusing time.
And for many people, sadly, Kathy, it still is.
100%.
Right. So
Hence the
here we
reason we
have,
did the webinar.
right, exactly. I mean, there's these great MS centers now. They provide
Mhm.
comprehensive care. Most of them are academic, but there are those that are private. But then
Yeah.
there are these swaths of the country where that doesn't
Right.
exist for people. So I think
Absolutely.
that's where organizations and like Can Do and
Yes.
MSA and the National MS Society, but to me, that's where we have to plug in and help
Yeah.
people, right? Because
Yes.
how in the world would someone know, oh, well, I have MS, clearly I need to do this, 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 and this. How would
Yeah.
they do that? It doesn't come with a script, right?
I mean, Kathy, absolutely. I mean, even doing once a month, I do a women's support group. And I love this part of it because I think you'll understand this as being a nurse for so long. I love the variety of having our newly diagnosed women, and then our women that have been diagnosed even longer than I have been, 30, 40 years. And I think there's so much that we can feed each other, right? You've got our newly diagnosed women that are nervous, obviously, but also have this grit that they're going to fight it. They're not going to give up. They've got this, they know some things. They know that exercise is important, nutrition is important. Then you've got some of us that have fought so long that are almost just exhausted, and they forgot their why. And so I love the camaraderie of the different ages because we really kind of spur each other on. Those younger women that come on, and the older women are great. The women that have had it so long are great at coming around them and supporting them. And then the younger girls that come on are really good at helping us that have fought it for so long, helping us to remember our why, and that we are still breathing and we are still fighting this. So I really love that the different ages that come along and really help each other out. So I think that's a great way that we can help each other and say, have you looked into Can Do MS? Have you looked into the different avenues, the different ways, the different things that you could participate in, the different ways that they could help you? Because there are so many different programs now that weren't there years ago. So those are just great things that we so much appreciate as we lead support groups, that we can, bring them something that we cannot offer, but we can say, we would love for you to look into this. So
yes. That's awesome. I love hearing that. And honestly, well, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about this, but a lot of what people take with them when they've participated in a Can Do MS program is just what you're saying. People often come because there's information that they're interested in learning, right? A particular topic. But the way we structure things is in small groups, and it's facilitated by a healthcare professional or a wellness coach or a health coach.
Right.
And we make sure that it's not just a physician or a nurse, but it's very multidisciplinary, right? And the beauty is what people go away with is the connections that they've made, and the support that they feel, and what they've learned from each other. And that to me is so much more powerful than anything else that we could do. And I think it's a strength of our organization, because that's how our programs run. That's what we're about.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. First, before we go further, I want to say congratulations. How many years have you been married, and when was your anniversary, ma'am?
It was Monday, the 7th of November. And it marked 41 years.
Congratulations. That is awesome. It's so great to hear those things.
Yes.
I was remarried. I went through a very, just a horrible divorce in 2013. And, never thought that I was going to remarry. My kids would always tease me, Mom, you have to do something besides work. And I'm like, no, I don't. I'm fine. And this man came into my life. I was his trainer. And as you know, I owned my own facility, my own studio gym, and then closed that down so that I could work with my MS patients and my autoimmune patients. And before that, I was his trainer, and he fired me to date me. And then this amazing man I am married to, and now we have 5 adult children. So it is, I'm very blessed, and we've been married since 2019. So, it is a very big blessing that I did not see, but, I'm very, very grateful. So congratulations. That is an amazing thing to, be very proud of. And how many kids?
We have 2 kids. We have 2 adult children. Our daughter is 34 and our son is 38, and they're fabulous. And our son has 2 daughters, and they are 3 and 6. And
That.
they're fantastic.
And you'll be seeing them in the holidays, right?
Yes, for sure.
That's great.
I see my son often and my granddaughters, because they're not too far away from us. I don't have an opportunity to see my daughter, and I'll say to her, oh my goodness, I need a dose. I need a dose of my daughter.
Yeah.
She is a nutritionist and a health coach, and helped me see things differently. When I was working as a nurse practitioner, she would say, hey, maybe look at things through a different lens. And it's so helpful. And even my son, I'd say, listen, if you were diagnosed with MS right now, right today, where would you go for information? And what information would you think you would need? Right. And it's an interesting perspective. So I would often ask my kids, particularly my son, because he's very techie. And I'd say, well, what would you do? Where would you go? Who would you want to talk to? Right. And he's an N of 1, but it actually makes me start to think about what things I need to ask other people.
Yes.
Right? So that I can learn about how people want to receive information, how much information, in what form, those kinds of things. So I lean on my kids a lot.
I think that's great.
And they've been terrific. They know more about MS than they thought they ever would. They were my subjects when I was learning my skills as a nurse practitioner.
I love that. Our kids get used for so much, right, Kathy?
They do.
I mean, as I was becoming a trainer, I would sit my kids down, and they didn't know they were going to be my workout guinea pigs, but I was like, okay, then like, now what? I'm like, now you have MS. They're like, oh gosh. I'm like, so now you have MS. We're going to do some drop foot things. They're like, again. So I'm like, every new certification, it was things that they had to do. So that's what they're there for. They're there to help. And so I absolutely understand. I appreciate that so much. So
for sure. So I look forward to all of us being together. That's those special moments, particularly once the kids are adults, they're doing their own thing and living their life. So those moments where we can bring everybody in the same place, they're just the best.
Yes. So did I hear you right in your writing? Is your daughter cooking?
Cooking? Yes. She's a nutritionist, but part of her training was definitely learning to cook differently. So now you maintain the nutritional value of the foods that you're eating, and also learning about the value of those foods. So a lot of her nutritional recommendations are more whole food. And it's very integrative. In fact, she went to Maryland University for integrative health. And after her nutrition degree, she went back for health coaching. And so she's put those two together in her practice. So important. Yeah. And she has seen quite a few folks who have MS because I worked at Johns Hopkins while she was in graduate school. So we started thinking about, and this was back when we were really starting in the MS research world, to think about diet and nutrition and also, the gut microbiome, vitamin D, all of these things started to come along almost simultaneously. And so she worked with the center to do some, not coaching, but really learning about what people were doing. In any case, so now she has used a lot of that information, a lot of what she's learned, and now sees people with a number of different medical conditions.
I thought when I read that she was cooking for Thanksgiving.
Oh, she is cooking for Thanksgiving.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
and I was like,
sorry.
25 people? Is that what you said? And I was like, wow.
Yeah, no, she's terrific, but we'll work
That's
together.
amazing.
It'll be fun. It'll be fun.
Yeah, that'll be great.
It'll be crazy. And it'll be maybe not so controlled chaos, and that's
Yeah.
but that's
It's
kind of what makes
great.
the holidays
No,
fun.
doing so much research in nutrition and just learning for myself and for my clients and stuff. There is so many different ways, and we'll go through that. And a lot of times I'll do the same thing. I'll ask them to, let's go into Whole Foods. Let's go into that. And if you can't pronounce the ingredients, it's probably not something you're supposed to eat. So let's just do away with that. And so I'll often have them, let's go away from dairy. Let's just take that out first. And then nothing else. Let's just take that out first and then see how we do. And because, some are ready to take it all and go all out, just do it. And some are like terrified. And
Exactly.
so, you got to go slow, and let's just take dairy out for a few months and see how we do. And so they do really well because, it kind of gets nerve wracking. Like yesterday in our second part of the webinar, it was like swings, there's so many diets, right? For us. And they're like, what do I do? Can I eat red meat? Can I not eat red meat? There's so many different diets. And Dr. Bieber did a great job, as you can imagine, doing he had all the charts and the different diets and how some people did on some and some people did on different ones. And so it was really great to be able to see and the different options for us. There's not just one thing, but there are things that we can feel in our own bodies that work really well, and some that don't work for us. And so I think that that's really important that we have those options that we didn't have years ago.
I totally agree. Absolutely.
And learning so much about, obviously, a big part. And I think when you guys see, and thank you so much for your support in the webinar, which was a big part for me to put this on for the first time. And I think you understand, as a female, being told as I was learning more and more about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to kind of change my focus as a trainer growing up and really always loving sports and always really loving movement and how the body moves. And that was just always a fascination for me. And then really kind of after getting diagnosed at such a young age, really understanding how my body was changing and watching my grandfather and then my aunt not move. As more than I do back then, it was rest, right? And so I just couldn't wrap my mind around that. It didn't make any sense to me that, okay, I've seen this. I've seen the rest, but I also saw their bodies atrophy, and I saw them really go down quick. So that doesn't make sense to me. I know that there is a rest time. I know that we need to have rest, but there's movement, there has to be. So I did go, against the grain on that. And I did movement. And yes, for sure, I did more than I was supposed to. There weren't any guidelines back then.
Sure.
So I did what I knew. And I'm so grateful for that, because I believe wholeheartedly that the way I ate and the way I moved allowed me to do what I can do now, 20 something years later. And so, now we know that we have to get so much exercise, I believe probably more. But I think that, and I know with Can Do MS, there's so many programs, and we'll get to that. But I think that we know so much more now. And when we have our newly diagnosed patients, we can say that there will be times that movement may look like you're going for a walk with your dog. It may look like you are strolling in your chair and you're taking your dog. Movement may look different for all of us. But movement must happen. You can do movement from your bed. And a lot of my clients, I'll do it with them. You're in your bed, we're going to do some movement. You didn't think you could do cardio from your bed? Guess what? We're going to do it. So it is a very exciting time, I would say, in the world of MS when it comes to things that we know we can do now. And so that's very exciting.
Yes.
So take us to now, after you were at Maryland, you were at Johns Hopkins for about how long?
Not quite 10 years.
Okay.
And as a nurse practitioner.
Okay. And that was after Maryland?
After Maryland.
Okay.
That's right. And there was a researcher there. He's still there, actually. He leads the MS Center. His name is Peter Calabrese, and he was briefly at the University of Maryland. And he's fantastic. He is smart. He is a completely ethical researcher. Like, he just does things the right way.
Oh, you love that?
And he cares deeply about people living with this disease. Um, if he was a full-time clinician, he would be spectacular. We, of course, then would lose his brilliance in the research world.
Right.
So for him, he wanted to concentrate more in the research world.
Yeah.
He left the University of Maryland and went to Hopkins, where he could concentrate.
Okay.
But ultimately, I was at a conference with him, and I said, so you have any openings? What's going on? And he's like, wait, what? You're interested? And I said, yeah, of course. I said, because I had so much respect for him.
Yeah.
And so it took a little while, but ultimately I did make the move over there. And for me, the beauty was many of the people who I knew at the University of Maryland were able to come along and see me at Johns Hopkins as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
About 2.5 miles apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not really big.
Yeah.
Which was wonderful because I had such long-term relationships with so many people. So anyway, I stayed there. And
sounds like, Kathy, you had no problem making relationships. That is not an issue for you.
No, I don't think so. I think that people who are going through a lot in their life, whether it's medical or something else, if you just give people an opportunity to tell you what's on their mind and just listen. I have my dearest friend in my life is the best listener I've ever met. She is an active listener, and I try and emulate that, because when we do that, when we actually just listen to people, that's when the relationships really happen, because that's when you really know someone, right? And so maybe that is why I don't have any trouble making these different relationships happen, but it's always a learning to me. It's always a learning on how I can get to know someone, how I can help them best. So in going to Hopkins, I wasn't in charge of anything. I was on the staff, and it was really a wonderful experience. Hopkins is a different kind of a place. It's kind of like Mayo Clinic or Mass General. It's big, and people come from all over the world. And so it was a very awe-inspiring experience. Sure. And while I was there was this opportunity to be part of the National MS Society and lead their work in professional education and development. So their postdoc fellowship program, fellows education, and then other professional education opportunities that we had.
What was that like?
That was, well, the MS Society is a spectacular organization. I mean, they are so important to policy, to making things happen at this kind of global level, or at least countrywide. And I think that they are very good at it. Their public policy department is active and well respected, and I was able to work with them, and they've affected a lot of change because of the work that they've been able to do. The fellowship program that I had a big part in was where people would specialize in MS care. So the fellowships that I was involved with reviewing were all about clinical work. So they were about learning more about MS in order to become that best clinician, to become that next MS expert. And now it's been a while since I was there, so I'm going to guess that there's probably well over 150 fellows who have been through that program. It was started, by the way, by a nurse who was working at the society, not me, and who knew that we needed to provide education and specialized training for physicians.
Yes.
And so she basically pushed that through and got it started, and then it's evolved over time. But it's a very prestigious fellowship program for someone to go through. And we have many, many applicants, which is wonderful.
Yes.
And it's still going on. And so I was very, very happy and proud to be part of the organization and part of that work. The difference was it did take me away from people with MS. It became more indirect, right? And I really wanted to get back closer to the person living with the disease.
Sure.
And Can Do MS actually reached out to me and
Mhm.
asked me if I would have interest. And I thought about it for quite some time and thought, I do. So
Yeah.
I
Because
decided.
that's really where your heart is to be with the
Exactly.
patients.
Exactly. So while it was difficult to leave the National MS Society, and that I had great relationships there, and I was I was proud to be part of an organization doing the things that they were doing. Um,
Sure.
my heart said to me, "This is where you want to be," which is Can Do MS.
Yeah.
Here I am.
Yes. So with that, I'm going to take a break and we're going to go into our second part of our interview, and we're going to go on to Can Do MS. So tune in. We're going to come back and we're going to go into part 2 with Kathy Costello. So we'll be right back and we're going to go into part 2. So we'll see you in just a minute.